the idea for this video from a comment old fan from Forever Wolf Films left on my previous drawing video. She said that she had never watched a video on vegan art supplies. I realized that I hadn't either. I just got my information from a few blogs, and I also had to contact some of the paint suppliers myself. When you're buying cruelty-free, beyond obvious things like meat, you really have to do a lot of homework because literally every product you use could have an animal in it or be made in some unethical manner. So this will be just a mini review of these cruelty-free art supplies. It won't be very in-depth because there are plenty of channels dedicated to this kind of thing, and you can find reviews for these paints on YouTube that go more in depth. I'll be talking about the activist who is the subject of this illustration, and activism in general, mostly pertaining to anti-natalism. More vegan art supply videos are linked in the description. I'm starting off by showing you a bit of the pencil work on this one. I didn't really think about making this a video until I was about halfway done, and plus you don't really want to see the crude beginnings of this thing. This is probably the cringiest part to share because it's kind of a peek behind the curtain where I'm still figuring things out, discovering the major mistakes, and doing a lot of erasing and redrawing. This in particular is the kind of drawing that has a higher degree of difficulty because it's a portrait, of a real person. I used two pictures as my reference, and I was constantly referring to them and refining until I thought it started to look like him. As you can tell, I'm working on a light box. It's just so I can flip the drawing over, and the mistakes just pop right out at you when you do that. Also, flipping it upside down is a good thing to do too. And because I have a light box, it would have been so much easier to just print out a photo and trace it. And there's really nothing wrong with doing that technique, except that you miss out on a chance to gain valuable drawing experience. The pencil sketch, to me, ended up looking a lot more like the subject than the final product, but that's just how it goes sometimes. Some subtle things get lost in translation. That's why some artists don't use this blow-up technique that I'm using. I do have a new video set up. An old fan was also asking me in my last video about what camera I use, and I had a lot of problems with my last drawing time-lapse because my camera actually overheats after 20 minutes of use. Just too bad. I really like the camera, but it's a still camera. It's not meant for video. So I upgraded, or downgraded you could say. It's a pretty cheap webcam. It cost me about $50. It's a Logitech C920. But I really like it because I can mount it to a microphone stand and put it directly above my drawing table. Then I use some free software called YawCam. It's freeware, and it's mostly meant for security. But it takes a picture once every second. When you make a video out of it, it's all sped up already. You don't have to speed it up that much. So now, as you can see, I'm moving on to the inking stage. This drawing has been blown up. Not sure how many times, about 5 times I would say. I wanted to do it as an 11 by 17 image because I had a frame that would fit that. I talked a little bit about in the first Let's Draw video. The India ink does contain a product that comes from animals. It's called shellac and it's made from beetles. So here is Speedball's vegan pigmented ink. Is it as beautiful as India ink? I would say not quite. Is it easier to use? No, not quite. It's just it's a little bit grittier, I would say. But is it 100% waterproof? Absolutely, and that's what I wanted. It's just as dark as India ink. It's pretty close in quality. It just doesn't have that kind of nice shiny effect you get from India ink, which of course comes from the bugs. But I could see continuing to use this ink. It's good enough, and it's not expensive, and it's vegan. These are the cruelty-free watercolors I selected. They're made by a company called Van Gogh. They're around $27, so kind of expensive for watercolors of this size. But I'm really happy with them. The colors are very bright and mixed really well. All 3 of these brushes I'm using are from Animal Free Synthetics. And one of the great things about synthetic brushes, they're actually cheaper than hair. So these weren't synthetic of any kind of compassion for animals. These were just cheaper to make. But thankfully, they're pretty high quality. These brushes were named after another great artist, Leonardo da Vinci. Paper, I didn't want to use the toothier watercolor paper, so I went with Bristol board, which is vegan, just by itself. So I think any Bristol board you get is probably going to be vegan because it's not made for watercolors specifically. But this brand, Strathmore, you'll find it everywhere. Their watercolor paper is also vegan, which is pretty rare. Most watercolor paper is covered in gelatin. So yeah, I recommend Strathmore paper. The reason I didn't want to use the toothier paper is because I was going to be doing an ink layer, and I prefer to have a nice smooth paper for inking with a tiny brush. So now let's get to the subject. I thought that a good test of these vegan supplies would be painting local vegan activist Gary Yourofsky. In case you don't know who he is, or many years of speaking to tens of thousands of college students across America, he crafted a bulletproof, hour-long argument for the vegan lifestyle. Conservatively, he's converted 1 million people to veganism, and that's being very conservative. And that's the power of YouTube, not just his tour. He's also spoken internationally. One of his videos, called The Best Speech You'll Ever Hear, went viral in a major way, kind of when YouTube was just getting started. It especially impacted the country of Israel, where a huge amount of the population has turned to veganism. You can actually find tofu in Israel that says Gary TV with a link to the speech on it. So anyone who says that putting out videos on YouTube is not activism is completely full of shit. Activists of the past could only dream of this platform that could potentially reach anyone and everyone on the planet. Of course, the problem is getting your voice heard over millions of hours of people talking about video games. So Gary Yourofsky started out in Michigan by chaining himself in front of slaughterhouse doors so trucks couldn't bring in the victims to be murdered. And then eventually he sabotaged a mink farm in Canada and got some prison time for it, in addition to being deported. So he kind of got off easy as far as the punishment goes. But he realized that sitting in a cell wasn't going to do anything for animals in the long term, and that education was the best way to reach people and change their minds. He was right about that. Every person who stops eating meat, eggs, and dairy saves around 100 animals per year. So multiply that by 1 million. Because we were from the same area of Michigan, I was able to meet Gary a couple times. Here he is showing me how to feed some goats at the Sasha Farm Animal Sanctuary. So he made a video, which I'll link in the description, called Be Gary for a Day, about how anyone can give ethics lectures like he did. And there's absolutely no reason why one could not go to schools and lecture on antinatalism instead of veganism. Probably help to have a YouTube channel, website, book, or something to give you some credibility. You don't even have to have a flair for public speaking either. It just takes a little practice to develop a good speech or lecture. I always had a hard time with public speaking until I took a course in college and realized that all you have to do is have your words down from practice and the anxiety starts to go away. Once you do it a few times, it becomes normal. I'd always practice speeches in front of a mirror or record myself to make some improvements. I also attended a club called Toastmasters, if any of you have heard of that, where you practice speeches in front of an audience. It was very educational. I got lots of great feedback, and that's probably when I was at my best at public speaking. I'm a bit out of practice now, but it's something I would be willing to do. So there are lots of different types of activism. Probably the one vegans practice the most is called the boycott. Just by not giving money to these industries, you are practicing activism. Just by not supporting evil industries, you are being an activist. You are hurting them financially. And then another one that people seem to be very into these days is the protests, the public protests. These really are based on the idea of the strike, where you would stop working and you would negatively impact the finances of a company. However, protests don't really have the benefit of directly injuring a business, unless you can't really block the door and stop people from coming in. So they have a limited appeal, but it's a way to get your message out in the real world. I just don't think it's as effective as internet activism. Of course, you can always write letters and emails to politicians, celebrities, or people who actually have a wide audience, maybe even other YouTubers, trying to get them to talk about antinatalism. Maybe someone talked to Sam Harris and sent him a copy of David Benatar's book, and that's how he got on the program. You never know. Things like that can really cause a spark. Of course, there's word of mouth, simply talking about antinatalism or veganism. And then, of course, there's having public signs, stickers, t-shirts. This is kind of a passive activism. If anyone watches Child Free Diane's channel, she really uses these techniques to great effect, and she has the nerve to go out and actually talk to people about antinatalism too. I think that's really cool. And then, of course, there's the kind of activism I'm performing here. There's art activism. Art can have a very wide influence. And you can definitely consider YouTube videos art. Gary Amendum is definitely practices the high art of the response video. This painting was donated to Sasha Farm's Animal Sanctuary in Manchester, Michigan, for their annual silent auction. It was a great event with great vegan food. Sorry I didn't take much video of the event. There's lots of paintings and little art projects that people sold there. Gary Yourofsky was not there, but I did send him an email of the painting and he liked it. If you ever need any motivation to be an antenatal or vegan activist or just for utilitarian ethics, I would say just think of the victims. Think about the unborn. Think about innocent animals being born into this cruel, cruel world against their will, and let them be the reason why you advocate for antinatalism, veganism, and just proper ethics. Alright, thank you for watching.